Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and it's a wonderful gray day, which is my favorite time to read philosophy and really just dig into thought-provoking texts. The children are having snacks and playing in the living room, so I am over here with the birdie birds, and they are about to learn some philosophy. Let's begin, okay? Now, we're dealing with something called the higher man now in this section, okay? And let's see what Nietzsche has to say. He said a lot about all the other categories, but now we will see what he says about this one. Let's begin. Bismillah. The first time I came to men, I committed the folly of hermits, the great folly. I stood, Bismillah, in the marketplace, and as I spoke to all, I spoke to none. Now, speaking to all and speaking to none. You know what's interesting about that is when somebody becomes too general in their life, there's a problem of being overly niche and overly palatable to everyone. Because you can't please everyone. So I find that quite interesting. That if you speak to all, you speak to none. But in the evening, tightrope walkers and corpses were my companions. And I myself was almost a corpse. But with the new morning, a new truth came to me. I learned to say of what concern to me are market and mob noise, and long mob ears. So, I remember there was like some hadith that talked about how women, beware of the marketplace. And if you think historically about when you go into the market in past empires, there's really a lot of hubbub in the market. So, you're going to communicate with people, socialize, loiter. There's a lot of ribble rabble gossip, So today the hive mind isn't necessarily in the outdoor markets like in past empires, but I would say it's on X. That's kind of like the marketplace of ideas, and where communication happens more than the old-fashioned way. And so one could argue that the modern mob that he's speaking of, he's speaking of the mob of his time, of the markets. But I'd argue that it's now the digital sphere. So, mob ears, mob noise, markets and mob. You higher men learn this from me. In the marketplace, nobody believes in higher men. And if you want to speak there, very well. But the mob blinks. We are all equal. So, the mob blinks, we are all equal. Oh no, feminist triggered, equality. But are we all equal? The notion we're equal before the law, we so hope. Maybe, but hierarchy in and of itself is not equality. So you can't really make everything equal. You can't. Because some standards can be made across the board, but not everyone's going to really have that. And so, when Nietzsche's here talking about the mob blinks, we are all equal, that means there can't be a higher man. Because if you're going to enforce equality, no one can be higher. And that's a very interesting phrase here for us. So Nietzsche already out the gate is getting us to think. You higher men, thus blinks the mob, there are no higher men. We are all equal. Man is man. Before God, we are all equal. Now, what I would argue is that we're all equal to do good deeds, right? There is plenty of hadiths that talk about different ways to earn nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we all have the opportunity to get nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we know that some people will inherently be closer to Allah than us, right? May Allah help us all get nearness to Him. But the disbeliever, the kafir, is not the same as the believer. Therefore, we're not equal. because the believer is obviously, who's upon Tawheed, is going to be more favored to Allah, by Allah, right, than the one who is a polytheist. So, on Judgment Day, we have an equal opportunity to have our deeds measured, but we're not inherently equal in the sense of who we are. You know what I mean? The conversation of equality can go so many different routes, and that's what makes it fun. So Nietzsche has already started that conversation here for us. Before God, but now this God has died. And before the mob we do not want to be equal. You higher men, go away from the marketplace. Now here we see something interesting. The famous line that he said repeatedly, God is dead. But then he says, if you are a higher person, you don't want to be equal to the mob. So that would then make us realize, if you are higher, to lower yourself to the lowest common denominator is not good. I saw a very interesting consciousness piece of art. Everybody's necks were bent down, staring at the ground, and then there was a lawnmower coming across everything. It's hard to explain the art picture. One person had their head poked up, and then here comes a lawnmower with its blades to take off that head. So that's enforced equality. Everyone must have their heads down to be equal. Anyone who sticks their head up is not being equal and is raising their head above everyone else's. So everyone who raises their head above, off it goes. It's hard to explain, but there's some pieces of artwork that I have to try to find it again. But there's some pieces of artwork that speak without having words. And that was a great art piece. Because in order to enforce, Assalamu alaikum, agent, in order to enforce equality, you must fetter, reduce, restrain others. And sometimes there's going to be people who just have different abilities who you should unleash them and let them get what they're going to get. Now, part 2. Before God, but now this God has died. You higher men, this God was your greatest danger. It is only since he lies in this tomb that you have been resurrected. Only now the great noons come. Only now the higher man becomes Lord. Have you understood this word, O my brothers? You are startled. Your hearts become giddy. Does the abyss yawn before you? Does the hellhound howl at you? Now the hellhound, talk about a very accurate type of sound to denote fear, okay? Now, I want you to picture what a hellhound would be like. Okay, so a howl is like when you were in the woods and it's dark, and imagine firearms have not been invented. And you hear just like that, like you'd be like, whoa, we gotta get going, move your family. You know, it's not like today where dogs are these little ridiculous dumb labradoodles. You know, even though some are cute. Past wild dogs act just like what they are, the descendants of wolves, okay? A hellhound, the hound breeds are like, they have long ears, something like Ahmad, and their howl can unnerve you. If you've ever heard a Cane Corso dog bark in the mountains, like my dad would bring the Mastiff and the Rottweiler with us, when that dog would bark, his echo of his deep voice would just permeate the mountainscape, alright? Scare off bears, coyotes, wolves, mountain lions. Very ferocious animal, okay? Now, think about runaway slaves in America. They had hounds that would make a lot of noise as they're coming after you, and they're a pack. Bloodhounds, they were called. They got long ears, because the long ears helps move dirt around and they can pick up your scent and they can follow you pretty far. Think about Ramsay Bolton's hunting hounds that he would unleash on one of the blonde girls that was his friends, that his girlfriend got jealous of. He would chase people. He would have his hounds chase humans. So they were technically hellhounds. Okay, so dogs that are accustomed to hunting people. For example, the ancient Romans had Rottweiler-looking mastiffs. The Italian Mastiff is said to be of them. The direct genealogy of that breed is to be debated. But either way, the Romans had dogs they utilized in war. Okay? So you would hear these beasts coming after you as you're running full clip, and you would be scared, even if you're a super tough guy, because their jaws are going to shred your skin, unless you had some type of armor. But even then, the dog can find a spot where there isn't any armor if it's been trained right. So when Nietzsche inserts this line, does the hellhound howl at you? Are you worthy of being hunted? Are you worthy of having such a animal be after you? Think about when an assailant or a criminal is fleeing and the police unleash the canine unit. That's because that person is running too fast for the cop. They're getting away, so they must unleash the dogs in order to really get that person, right? Assalamu alaikum, Abdul Rahman. And so to be a higher man, now a criminal is not a higher man. I'm just getting at a person being to the point where extra measures must be unleashed in order to track them down, find them, and defeat them, right? Now, if you need a hellhound after you, that's going to be a chilling sound in the air and a hot pursuit, because dogs can sniff you across trails, okay? This is not something familiar to people who haven't been raised around dogs or gone hunting with a pack of dogs, or really examined the history of certain dog breeds. So that's why I'm explaining the sort of hellhound. Because if you were to hear that growl, that howl that those dogs make, you would be unnerved. So it's very interesting that he includes that here. Well then, you higher men, only now is the mountain of man's future in labor. God died. Now we want the overmen to live. So again, he repeats his famous lines. The overman, the higher man, and then the metaphorical God is dead. Metaphorical. There's been a lot of explanations from different philosophers about exactly what that means, and you can have fun analyzing it, but Nietzsche is not somebody you just take a surface level reading, and you have a right to interpret it as your own, because philosophy has a lot more freedom with how you interpret things. Okay. Part 3. The most concern asked today is, how is man to be preserved? Okay, so how is man to be preserved? Elon Musk would say send people to the Mars planet. Others would say put morality back in society via religion. So how do you preserve humanity? I would say with the Islamic ethos. But alas, that is one of the big questions people are arguing with. But Zarathustra is the first and only one to ask, how is man to be overcome? Okay, so how to overcome man? How is man to be preserved? So preservation versus overcoming. Just change, maintenance versus leveling up to another level. I have the overman at heart. That is my first and only concern. and not man. Not the neighbor, not the poorest, not the most ailing, not the best. Oh, my brothers, what I can love in man is that he is an overture and a going under. And in you too, there is much that lets me love and hope. That you despise, you higher man, that lets me hope. For the great despisers are the great reverers. So we have great despisers, great reverers. Now, I remember, like, Muslim was once said to me, a Muslim shouldn't despise another Muslim. I wasn't 100% true. If that's true, but you're not supposed to curse your fellow Muslim, because you don't want to aid Shaitan in destroying them, and rather you should pray for them. But if you hate what Allah hates and love what Allah loves, then naturally you would have this ability to despise what Allah despises. So there's a paradox there as well. That you have to despair in that there is much to revere, for you did not learn how to surrender. You did not learn petty prudences. Petty prudences. For today the little people lord it. They all preach surrender, resignation, and prudence. So this is a Christian ethos. And industry and consideration and the long etc. of the small virtues. So industry, consideration. So we don't say we surrender. We say we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as slaves. We don't resignate ourselves as Muslims from my understanding, but rather we say Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to Allah, and we accept what has been allotted to us, but we don't wallow in apathetic resignation. Prudence, there's an argument there. Industry, yes, but there's a balance that we have as Muslims where you don't neglect your prayers and you don't put the dunya before the hereafter, but you are not to be a beggar. If you have read Riyadh Salihin Volume 1 and Volume 2, you would see lots of stuff in there that talk about not begging, and it's better for you to sell firewood than to beg. Assalamu alaikum, Renaissance man. Okay, in consideration, the hadith that comes to mind is you should want for your brother what you would want for yourself. I think I might be putting that too concisely, but the believers have rights over one another. You're supposed to treat your fellow believers well, and there's another hadith that talks about not striking the donkey on the face or an animal on the face, and another hadith that talks about a woman who will be in hell or is in hell, I forgot, who starved her cat to death. So she was not considerate of her cat, and she's going to be punished for that. And then there's another hadith that talks about there was a prostitute who took her shoe, gave a dog water. She's going to be in paradise. She was considerate to the dog, right? So in Islam, we do have the notion of consideration, both for the human and creatures of the earth, but not to the point to where we are pacifistic, feet washing, feet kissing Christians. Not to that degree. Okay? We are not like the Taoists. I think it was the Taoists. Or were they Jainists? One of those Buddhistic type of religions. They walk with a broom, sweeping bugs, because they just want to make sure they don't crush any any living creature. And they're a bit tree-hugging fanatics in a very weird way. We don't go to that level of paranoia, but we also don't become destructive to our environment. So there's a really interesting balance here. So the small virtues that Nietzsche is mentioning can be examined in so many ways depending how you're approaching the subject, which is great. That's what's fun about Nietzsche. What is womanish? What derives from the servile? Now here, what is he getting at here? So it's womanish to serve, feminists screaming. Feminists right now, there's a feminist like, how dare you, Nietzsche? Ah! Next thing we know, Nietzsche is cancelled by the radical feminists. But what he's saying is to be servile is to be womanish, which is funny because we women are supposed to serve our children, serve others, and serve our men, and so it's kind of funny. Nietzsche's being a bit salty, he's throwing it at us, but it's still funny. And especially the mob hodgepodge. I'm telling you, Nietzsche and Shakespeare, they were alive today. We should, it would be cool to make them have a rap battle. No music, just freestyling with their funny insults. Now, I wonder who would be more of a master of rhetoric, Nietzsche or Shakespeare, although German versus English, right? That would now become master of all human destiny. Oh, nausea, 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 that asks and asks and never grows weary. How is man to be preserved best, longest, most agreeably? So the preservation of humans, in the best of manners, the longest manners, and most agreeably. With that, they are the masters of today. Overcome these masters of today, O my brothers. These small people, they are the overmen's greatest danger. You ever heard someone say something like, you're small-minded, you're not seeing the bigger picture, think outside the box, you're a blockhead? We have phrases for this in natural language. For the small people that hold back those who are to lead and excel, right? A sort of enforced mediocrity. You higher men overcome the small virtues, the small prudences, the grain of sand, consideration, the ants' riff-raff, the wretched contentment, the happiness of the great number, and rather despair than surrender. And verily, I love you for not knowing how to live today. You are higher men, for thus you live best. So he contends that the higher men live best. Part 4. Do you have courage, O my brothers? Are you brave? Not courage before witnesses, but the courage of hermits and eagles, which is no longer watched even by God. So the courage of a hermit and the courage of eagle. Assalamu alaikum, gentlemen Q. Assalamu alaikum, amplifier. So what could a hermit have in terms of courage? Walking away from the crowd, breaking away from civilization, being comfortable inside their own mind when they don't really cling to escapism, although there is the hermits who drink ayahuasca and are kind of freaky, kind of weirdos. So it depends on what kind of hermit you are. But for the most part, a hermit is somebody who isn't afraid of confronting their own thoughts. Okay, the social butterfly is someone who... Okay, let me give you an example. I remember seeing a post where a woman had a tablet on, and then her TV was on, and then she had her phone on. So she had 3 different things being played at the same time. And in the reel, she said, I'll do anything to avoid my own thoughts. And people were like, that's so funny, that's so hilarious. And I thought to myself, no, that's actually really quite sad. Because and then it showed a little boy watching a video game and a soccer game at the same time on 2 different devices. And just kind of explained the splitting of the mind, right? Renaissance Man says, it reminds me of the Quran saying charity shouldn't be for showing off, and people saying, doing good for good and God's sake. Timeway says, do you think God is really dead, or is he dead only in Western enlightenments? I'd say only in... That's a great question, Western enlightenments. I would say, in a Nietzschean sense, the traditions of God, the things that God values, and the hypocrisy of clergy, I would definitely say, if you were to examine Christianity today, you would definitely think that their God is dead. Because dead as in no longer being resurrected with praise not being remembered, because if you're not remembered accurately, or do you exist? Once you are forgotten, you are dead, right? Your memory ceases to exist. It's like once people stop saying your name, knowing who you are, a couple of generations down the line, it's almost like you never existed. So it's interesting. Now, he mentions here the eagle's courage. Now, let's take the bald eagle. The bald eagle and the hermit are similar in a weird way. Why? Because the eagle builds its nest in high places, okay? And a hermit doesn't necessarily need a spouse, but a bald eagle needs a spouse to raise its chicks, right? And they both build the nest. But bald eagles don't necessarily hang out in flocks like budgies and crows and pigeons and seagulls. They're fine soaring through the sky by themselves, whereas other types of birds do best in a flock, right? So the hermit is not in the flock. They break away from the groupings, the society, the beehive, the city life, right? They become kind of Bedouins in their own way. The bald eagle is not like the pigeon, where they seek each other out. And so the crows, if you see them, they really do like to be together. And where one crow flocks, another will come eventually too. And they communicate when they find food. I like watching crows. In my Notam Animalibus playlist, you'll see a lot of videos where I just sit and watch crows, because they're quite interesting birds. But the bald eagle is just not that way. You will see bald eagles come together when they're hunting for salmon, right? Just like a hermit will go to town, to the marketplace, maybe they need to buy some medicine or some new socks or something, and they will participate in society when necessary, but they are not gonna fall apart. Other kinds of birds, if you leave them by themselves, they go crazy. If you give a budgie a mirror, which I don't do, the budgie will stare in the mirror to itself and it will stay there. It's very unhealthy psychologically. Some parrots, if you do not socialize with them, they will rip out their feathers. They need to have a flock, they need to have a buddy. Okay? Some hamsters, even though they fight with each other, they will chew on surfaces in a very alarming way. I had hamsters and I've watched them. And they become very lethargic, and they also chew on things and go crazy, and they don't do well. And rodents, they can be alone, but they still have some social aspect. So no matter which way you square it, there are animals who are social animals that need to be in a group, and this applies to humans as well. Okay? But the courage of a hermit to walk away from the crowd is not an easy task. How so? Okay, look at some people today. Okay, let me give you a modern example. There's an account on X called Cat Turd. He's a MAGA Christian conservative guy. Okay? He gets a lot of engagement on social media. Now, he was complaining the other day, if you go on his feed, that he says X is throttling me. You know, Elon Musk's platform X, formerly known as Twitter. He said, I'm being throttled. He wants more views, he wants more engagement, and he thinks that he's owed more, and he's addicted. Okay? He's addicted to the numbers. And he couldn't walk away from that on a serious level. Like, if you get canceled, like, I've been canceled a bunch of times, but I'm still uploading. It doesn't matter to me if 1,000 see it or 5 people see it. But there are some people, if they don't get enough views, they quit. They're not actually committed to what they believe in. They only believe in it as long as it gets them views. Okay? And so, the courage of the hermit is to accept whether 2 people heard you, and to not demand that a nation hear you. Right? So, unplugging from the digital sphere, or at least not expecting it to serve you, I would argue is a modern form of the courage of the hermit. Okay? It's fascinating. Just a very potent line that Nietzsche has here for us that can really make you think. Cold souls, mules, the blind, and the drunken I do not call brave. Brave is he who knows fear but conquers fear, who sees the abyss but with pride. That's a strong one there. Now, a cold soul, why is that an interesting line? Because most of us would think that a cold soul is quite brave. They were able to shut off certain human impulses and human responses. And we say to people, man, that's cold. You ever seen someone in a movie get smoked and the person has no reaction whatsoever? And the person says, man, that's cold. You smoked that guy. He's cold-blooded. Like, they don't have an emotion reaction. And you would think that person doesn't fear the law, they don't fear God, and they don't fear the repercussions of their actions. And so they are more cold-blooded. But Nietzsche contends that's not really bravery, right? This would then suggest that we must remember the difference between bravery and cruelty. Okay? Now, the mule, some may argue, why did he mention the mule as not being brave? Well, the donkey, the mule, they are very stubborn sometimes, and they won't go where they don't want to go, and if they do get spooked, they're not going to move, and they don't frighten as easy when they are docile. So it's a very interesting creature when you examine that animalistic example that he's given us. The blind, now this is interesting because a blind person isn't as... Okay, have you ever been in your house and you see something in the corner of your eye? You get scared. You go in the woods, you thought you saw something, it wasn't there. Humans can get scared by visual things, the shadow play of our minds. Okay, a horse can get spooked by a shadow, kick you off, and then run away. There goes your horse, right? Our eyes, they can lead us to being scared, and a blind person must rely upon their ears. Gentleman Q says, fear of the unknown, great point. The blind person has to attune their ears, and they react differently to some situations than someone who can see. Okay? But he says it's brave when you conquer fear. And when you look into that abyss and you have that sort of pride. So that is a leadership quality that I think the great men in history have. So that's a very interesting line. Who sees the abyss but with the eyes of an eagle? Who grasps the abyss with the talons of an eagle? That man has courage. So think about which nations have eagle iconography on their flags or in their nationalistic propaganda. America has the bald eagle. Mexico has, I think that's the brown eagle, golden eagle. I'm not sure what kind of eagle it is on the Mexican flag, who's eating a snake, I believe. Okay, Rome had theirs. Germany had their eagle. There's a reason why a predatory bird that has that penetrating stare and sharp vision is that soars a high, really high up. That's used in symbolizing a nation or symbolizing the ethos of a nation. Okay, just like if you were to put the elephant as your symbol, you would take on that trait. So there's a lot of symbolism there. Okay, and the talons, I want you to remember how long and sharp the talons are on an eagle. When they catch a fish, a nice juicy salmon, yummy yummy in Alaska, the salmon wiggles and wiggles and wiggles and is slippery if we are held it with our hands. Right? You ever try to grab a fish right out of the water and it's wiggling and wiggling and it slips and goes back in, you're like, damn it. But the talons of the eagle, well, the more that fish wiggles, the more sliced up, the more sashimi'd they get, right? So it's fascinating. Nietzsche's got some very interesting wordplay going on here for us. So grabbing fear by the talons. And the more that fear wiggles, the more it's torn to pieces. And the more torn to pieces it is, the less of a solid block it is. And less of a obtrusive object it becomes within your life once you tear it down within your mind. So Nietzsche has some great points here for us. Part 5. Man is evil. Thus said all the wisest to comfort me. Alas, if only it were still true today. That's a bit dark. For evil is man's best strength. Now that's a tense line right there. That's not an easy thing to digest. Man must become better and more evil. Thus I teach. The greatest evil is necessary for the overman's best. Now, this begs the question, well, how do you define evil? And another person's evil is not another person's evil, and then, boom, what happens? Moral relativism. Okay? A vegan will tell me I'm evil because I had a nice, fat, juicy tomahawk chop. They'll say to me, you are an abuser to that cow because you're eating it with salt and pepper and A1 steak sauce with a side of mashed potatoes and gravy. And I'll say, I don't consider that evil. Okay? But they'll say, you're perpetuating a system of oppression on that cow. It's like, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say eating meat is evil. So, sorry. You know what I mean? So, again, Nietzsche has given us something to think about, right? But what your ethical code calls evil, that's interesting, right? It may have been good for that preacher of the little people that he suffered and tried to bear man's sin, but I rejoiced over great sin as my greatest consolation. Now, okay. Rejoicing over the great sin as a form of consolation reminds me of a video I saw by TJ the Amazing Atheist, Timothy Kirk, TJ Kirk, Into the Fray. He's changed his name several times. He had a video, pardon me, where he ranked the best sins. And you're like, what's going on with you? Some saucy atheists and how they'll trivialize some sins and really try to take away the edge. And that's common with some atheists, is that they will mock what is considered a sin. And they will also take their sin and use it as a form of excuse to continue. So let's say someone says, my sin is doing X drug or something. And when I'm sad, I take it, therefore it's okay. It consoles me, therefore it's okay. Oh, well, this necessary evil consoles me, therefore it's okay. And you get into some really weedy area. So you gotta watch out for that. But this is not said for long ears. Not every word belongs in every mouth. Now that's a bar right there. Not every word belongs in every mouth. These are delicate, distant matters. They should not be reached by the sheep's hoofs. Ooh, saucy right there. Not reached by the sheep's hoofs. Okay. Sheep can only graze really well in the valleys where there's a lot of grass. If you've ever gone hiking, you will see the lumber line. The lumber line is not good for sheep because the air is thinner, there's less for them to graze on, and there's not trees for shade. And, you know, your animals can get lazy and just lay down. And you yourself going that high up is not very smart. And you're far away from the safety of your barn, of your fences. And then you're more up to having a bear, a coyote, a wolf, some other predator snatching away some of the sheep within your flock if you go too high up in the mountains. Okay? So, this is a very unique example because it shows you the hierarchy here. That some places are meant for some people and some places are meant for other people. Think of the phrase, If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Read the room, people will say. You're in the wrong saloon, pal. You'll hear phrases like that, right? But sometimes we think we always belong anywhere, and this isn't true. And so when he mentions long ears, some places should not be reached by the sheep's hoof, and also mountain goats, they can climb on, they're white and they have these curved horns. They can climb on the side face of the north face of a mountain cliff. A ram can do that as well and be totally fine. But your fluffy little sheep that you use for milk, wool, and whatnot, mutton soup, that's not for them. That's not their area. And you're a bad shepherd if you led them up there. You know, there's snow leopards. Imagine if you're in a region with snow leopards. That's the snow leopard's territory. The mountain cougar's lion's territory. You brought them a tasty meal, and you are leading your sheep into a place where they shouldn't be. And your sheepdog, your that Turkish white dog, I forgot what it's called. Pyrenees, I forgot. They're gonna have a hard time going up high up on those rocky. You know, their paws can get cut. It's just not good for them, okay? And they have thick fur. It's just not fun. And the higher up you go, if it's winter, you're gonna have an avalanche. It's not cool. So people have to realize what we're getting here is that not every word should be said by everyone. So what does that mean? Okay, you're not the messenger. You're not the one who should be the spokesperson. You're not the one who should be delivering the message. Okay, you're not the chosen one. You're not the one for the job. Okay? And some things should be left unsaid by certain types of people. Right? Which is a great point. Because that makes people realize you're not the one. Stay in your lane. Part 6. You hire men. Do you suppose I have come to set you right what you have set wrong? Or that I have come to you that suffer to bed you more comfortably? Or to you that are restless, have gone astray or climbed astray, to show you new and easier paths? Okay, so show you new and easier paths. Astray or climbed. Restless. Okay, so what are we getting at here? Oh, it's like, hey, do you think I came to make your life easier? It's true. That makes us all wonder, are we here to make your life easier? Or are we here to make you push yourself? No pain, no gain. Are we, like, what does somebody need in their life at a certain time? More relaxation or more motivation? That's an interesting thing. No, 3 times no. Evermore, ever better ones, your kind shall perish, for it shall be ever worse and harder for you. Thus alone, man grows to the height where lightning strikes and breaks him, lofty enough for lightning. My mind and my longing are directed toward the few. The long, the distant, what are your many small, short miseries to me? So many, the miseries. Like, not everyone cares about your issues, right? And so he's there for the long haul, and he's only for a few people. Remember what he talked about earlier, that he's not for everyone. What did he just say? Not every word belongs in every mouth. Now he says directed toward the few. Okay? And this is it again. Remember he mentioned the mob, okay? And that not everyone is equal. Okay. Mob, hodgepodge, he said. You gotta keep those themes in mind so that you know how he's repeating himself, but in a different fashion each time, with different words. He's really good at rhetoric. What are your many small, short miseries to me? You do not yet suffer enough to suit me, for you suffer from yourselves. You have not yet suffered from man. So suffering from others versus suffering from yourself. You know? Gentleman Q nailed that analogy. Oh, thanks, fam. Gentleman Q says the Ubermensch ideology is no different than the Darwinian society ideology, survival of the fittest, Superman. I've heard people say that, yes. You would lie if you claimed otherwise. You all do not suffer from what I have suffered. 7. It is not enough for me that lightning no longer does any harm. I do not wish to conduct it anyway. To conduct it away. It shall learn to work for me. So that makes me think of like the Zeus imagery. My wisdom has long gathered like a cloud. It is becoming stiller and darker. Thus does every wisdom that is yet to give birth to lightning bolts. Now the brainstorm. Brainstorm. What do you do when you brainstorm? All these ideas are coming together until lightning strikes. Oh, I got the idea, right? Think about how already we use these terms. Okay? And when something is still, you can see through it. When the water is clear, you can see, right? But it has to hold still so that you can penetrate the depths as far as you can. The water is moving, it's harder to actually see what's going on. When your mind can't be still and it's racing, it's harder for you to follow through on your thought patterns and remember what you started, and there's a bit more chaos. Now the darker part, this is an interesting one because some argue that if you want to defeat evil, you have to know things that evil is capable of. Okay? Some people will say, no, just focus on Disneyland. Focus on the bright. Focus on, positivity only. So there's a balance of nihilism and a balance of optimistic type of thoughts. I argue, and many have argued this as well, you gotta be able to contemplate both. Because that's how you can protect your people, protect your life, protect your family, and become more aware of what Earth is and what animals and humans and governments are capable of. So when you're sitting still, you're contemplating, you're focusing on your thoughts, all of a sudden, boom, like that, a light goes off, lightning. You think something, right? So the brainstorm is a perfect modern language, natural language phrase that we use all the time, and Nietzsche has put it here in another way. For these men of today, I do not wish to be light, or to be called light. These I wish to blind. Lightning of my wisdom, put out their eyes. Okay, so this is a saucy one for us. Light can be gentle or blinding. Okay, think of in Lord of the Rings, Frodo has that liquid light that he puts in the face of the tarantula, that giant spider creature. When it tries to eat him, he's able to put the light in that creature's face and it doesn't like it and he's able to keep it away. Okay? But then think about how if you're in a dark place but there's a candle, you can follow that through the abyss and get out. So the whole metaphor, allegory, and symbolism of a light in the darkness and blinding light can go so many different routes. And it's very interesting to think about. Now, lightning, wisdom, to take out someone's eyes, that's intense. So, He wants to be a lightning bolt. He doesn't want to be a candle. You know what I mean? Sorry, there's just part 8. Will nothing beyond your capacity. Will nothing beyond your capacity. Ooh. To know what you're capable of requires self-examination. There is a wicked falseness among those who will beyond their capacity. I've heard someone say, don't do intoxicants because you will get unearned wisdom. And I didn't agree with that because I don't think an intoxicated mind can give wisdom. But they can give maybe certain insights into mental derangement. Because the more someone, like, you'll see people who, they're really smart, but they start smoking weed, and then they start shooting off, and they forget what they said, and they think they've said something profound, but you're sober, they're high, and you're like, you're not making any sense, man. And they can't communicate the pictures in their head very well in a way that's profound. So their tongue can't elicit what it needs to at a rate fast enough that their brain is having images shoot through their head. Okay? So there's a disconnect there. So I don't think that weed gives you the capacity to really get wisdom. And it actually lowers your will because it lowers your inhibitions and makes you more slothy and relaxed. And when you're relaxed, you're not willing anything because will is a type of force. Okay? And so this is a very good line for us, that if you will beyond your capacity, you're lying to yourself, and that's a form of wicked evilness. Because think about, okay, somebody buys a pit bull. Let's pick on that dog. I've seen this. I saw a girl walking a pit bull. The dog was pulling her. She's not in control of that dog. She overestimated her ability and her strength. And if that dog decided to lunge at me or my children, I'd have to shank it in the throat, in the eye, and put it down. She didn't will herself to have the capacity to own such a dangerous dog. Sure, the dog may have the name Fluffy. The dog may be one that wears pajamas. Doesn't matter. She doesn't have a way of really understanding how she doesn't know how to train it, and she's not really. People say choke chains are evil, but a choke chain for a pit bull is better for other people. Okay? But I know some people don't like choke chains, but I always thought choke chains were great for dogs, because if a dog can't breathe and it's lunging at someone, it'll choke, and that can save a life. The harder a dog pulls against the leash and tries to attack another dog, it can't breathe. That's what a choke chain does, which pushes the dog to be more obedient. If you have a harness on a pit bull and it's pulling you, it's comfortable for the dog. So what's its incentive to stop doing what it's doing? You see what I mean? Yeah, there's so much there. So much there. Gentleman Q says, do you think wisdom can be achieved through a blind process of various experiences without a solid manner of guidance from a wise, all-wise source? I think all wisdom comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah will put certain trials for you of various experiences that can be a process you're unaware of, and you will get wisdom from that if you self-reflect on that experience. There's people who don't learn from other people's mistakes. And they don't learn from, what's that quote? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. People can make the same mistake over and over and not learn and not be able to communicate what they've learned. They run from the lesson instead of pausing and being still, and then do escapism with drugs that cloud their ability to really examine where they screwed up. So I think all wisdom comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to pray for wisdom and guidance and enlightenment and knowledge, all that good stuff, because He's the disposer of affairs, and no one can encompass His knowledge except as He wills. And since all knowledge comes from Him, that means you can't get into the wisdom bank without his permission. And so, that's what I would say. Gentleman accuses Albert Einstein said that, I believe. Yeah, I think he was the one who said that. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Okay. Especially if they will great things, for they arouse mistrust against great things, these subtle counterfeiters and actors, until finally they are false before themselves, squinters, white worm-eaten decay. So what does that mean? White worm-eaten decay, maggots. When something is rotten and it is being eaten by maggots, so you can't eat it. Like if you were having a piece of meat in it, or you hung up some deer to dry cure, and you didn't do it right, and you didn't seal it off, and it's got all those maggots in it, you cannot eat it. You see? Cloaked with strong words, with display virtues, with splendid false deeds. That's a potent one. Okay, cloaked in strong words. Think of the politician. We are gonna do this. Make America great again. Strong words. Right? But inflation, warmongering, pestilence, cutting jobs. Okay? Display virtues. So someone who's a hypocrite. Outwardly they display these virtues, but inwardly they may be doing gambling. They may be violating quite a lot of the rules of their own book. Splendid false deeds. So somebody could be doing something where you thought they were like giving to charity, but they weren't. So that's a splendid deed, but it was false, and it was based on false premises. Right? Take good care there, you higher men, for nothing today is more precious to me and rarer than honesty. So, honesty. Why is honesty so rare for so many people? Because honesty can get you into trouble, especially now. And not all honesty is smooth like butter, sweet like honey. It can be very pokey like a cactus. It can be rough. Okay? And women especially, I don't think a lot of women deal with honesty. They deal with flattery, and they'll say to you, don't judge me. That's a woman's number one defense. Don't judge. And you're like, what? That's not... And then they'll tell their husbands, don't lie to me. Why did you lie to me? And it's like, you're always telling people, don't tell you nothing. What did you expect? So, if your friend can be honest with you, and you can withstand each other's honesty, doesn't mean you have to say that honest thing hardcore. It's just means you have to display it. Martin Guerrer says, didn't know Muslims are allowed to read kafir literature. I mean, there's going to be people who say don't read anything that doesn't have to do with Islam. But if I was reading if a kafir wrote a book on the history of architecture in the 17th century, why can't I read that? I've had that said to me a few times. I don't think you know what, that's an interesting quote. Let's go back to what Nietzsche just said. Not every word belongs in every mouth. These are delicate, distant matters. They should not be reached for sheep's hoofs. So, think about that. Not every book needs to be read by every Muslim. Because not every Muslim is capable of dealing with things in a mature manner, nor are they interested. Every Muslim is going to concentrate on what it is they want to concentrate. Whether that's plumbing, or creating a video game, or being a car mechanic, or discussing foreign policies of China in the 13th century, right? Whatever it is, every Muslim's going to have their area of expertise that is separate from their Islamic identity. Because in order for society to function, people have to have trades, they have to have jobs, they have to have a way to communicate. As long as you're not innovating in the religion of Islam, I don't think you're sinning. And you're not forcing other people to learn what you're learning. If someone was sitting around talking about how to build a koi fish pond, that'd be really interesting to me. But that's not really going to be interesting to every Muslim. And every Muslim isn't required to learn how to build a koi fish pond. Just like with philosophy, you know, as a Muslim, I can talk to other people about different subjects. I don't just have to communicate with Muslims and only with Muslims about Islam. That's just not practical. That's not really how the world works. You know, I think that's more of a cultural stereotype that you're thinking of, right? Because I'm American. I'm an American Muslim, and I've had a Western education, you know. So to me, it's not something taboo. That doesn't make no sense to me. But I'm not going to go tell somebody who has different interests to focus on what I'm focusing on. Rather, I will seek out people who are interested in what I'm interested in and then bounce ideas off of them. I mean, as long as you're not innovating in the religion of Islam, well, yeah, then, you know, and there's nothing really sinful. Islam doesn't say be a retard, you know. Use your time well, don't neglect your duty to the Quran, and don't neglect your prayers. Stay halal, and you'll be alright. Renaissance Man says, Surah Az-Zumar 39:18, the verse says, those who listen to what is said and follow the best of it, those are the ones Allah has guided, and those are the people of understanding. Quran 39:18. The Quran says it's best to listen to everything and pick the best. MashaAllah. Okay. Take good care there, you higher men, for nothing today is more precious to me and rare than honesty. Is this today not the mob's, but the mob does not know what is great, what is small, what is straight and honest. It is innocently crooked, it always lies. So the mob is very fickle and can be controlled, that's true, through propaganda, and they'll follow what's the trend versus instead of what's the truth, in most cases. 9. Have a good mistrust today, you higher men, you stout-hearted ones, you open-hearted ones, and keep your reasons secret. So open-hearted versus keeping your reasons secret. For today is the mob's. What the mob once learned to believe without reasons, who could overthrow that with reasons? And in the marketplace, one convinces with gestures, but reasons make the mob mistrustful. And if truth was victorious for once, then ask yourself with good mistrust, what strong error fought for it? Beware of the scholars, they hate you, for they are sterile. They have cold, dried up eyes, before them every bird lies unplumed. Ooh. Wow. That's a tense one there. Now, what kind of scholar? Now, let's think of something here. Let's do an examination. In America, you hear stuff like, trust the experts. And then there'll be times where the experts are wrong. I mean, no one can be right 100% of the time. And you'll see more people advocate self-research and not just believing what some expert told them. However, as Muslims, we revere our Islamic scholars, and we pray for them and hope that they can not make a mistake or something. But this word scholar here can have synonyms. The experts, the appeal to authority, right? Those who, um, okay, think about in Game of Thrones, Samuel Tarly. He is helping Ser Jorah Mormont take off the grayscale disease. And one of the maesters, high up, a scholar of the Citadel, says, "You can't save Jorah Mormont, just give up. He's gonna die." And Sam says, "Nah." He helps save Jorah's life. And Sam is not a high up scholar, but he's scholarly. He saves Ser Jorah Mormont's life. So I think that's more of an example of what Nietzsche is getting at. Although that maester, he told Sam, you put the whole citadel at risk by handling an infected man and breaking protocol. And protocols basically exist for a reason, to prevent the spread of infection, right? Okay? So you can look at this in a number of ways. But again, remember, Nietzsche is himself quite saucy. Such men boast that they do not lie. But the inability to lie is far from the love of truth. Beware. Now that's an interesting line. Oh, we never lie. Loving of truth. Very interesting. Renaissance Man says, I saw a J scholar on YouTube say with confidence, the maximum time spent in hell for anyone is 12 months. That's the kind of scholar that comes to mind as cold and not alive or reliable. They have eased into their authority and lie or no longer know they lie. Ooh, that's a very good potent example. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, see? So, whenever we read Nietzsche, at first it can shock you, like slap you in the face, and you're like, what did he just say? But then you have to think of an example and be like, I get what he's saying. You may not agree with them in every circumstance, but he's good at getting saucy and really enlightening you. Or at least making you think about something you ain't thought before. Freedom from fever is not yet knowledge, by any means. I do not believe chilled spirits. Whoever is unable to lie does not know what truth is. Now that's interesting. Freedom from fever is not yet knowledge. Now, I remember the state of Jonestown. I forgot what it was called. It was like a guy, he was in during the Civil War era, and he has a baby who gets a fever, and none of the people know how to help the baby, but there's a Creole slave woman who knows how to break the fever and goes and gives some medicine to the guy's baby, and the baby lives. And so medicinal things are often learned by survivors and by those who have treated it. So if you know what truth is, you also need to know what lies are. And if you've never lied, then you don't know how to pick up on a lie. Think about how when Ser Jorah Mormont is skeptical of, what's that character's name? Dario Naharis, and he says something to Dario Naharis about, oh, this is your plan to open up the gates for us? Maybe you'll just cut us down when we get into the gate walls and take the 2 heads off of our army, of our forces. And Dario Naharis says, you have a very suspicious mind. Only dishonest people think this way. He says, I'm butchering it, but it's a line like that. What is that line of those 2 characters' dialogue suggesting? You know, Dario betrayed his commanders to serve Daenerys. Jorah betrayed Robert Baratheon and, you know, the goal of assassinating Daenerys Targaryen to serve her. They're both familiar with deception. And so they know how to lie, but that also helps them to see what truth is. Right? And, you know, Think of Tommen Baratheon, Tommen Lannister, when he cannot see how Marjorie Tyrell is manipulating him. And Marjorie Tyrell knows how to manipulate. She manipulates the High Sparrow in Game of Thrones. She manipulates him, right? So that she gets freed. Tommen is an idiot because he's not a liar. He's very honest, but he doesn't have a deviant. Or I shouldn't say deviant. He doesn't have a scheming capacity, and he's very soft, and he's not fit to be king because he's not aware. Right? Not saying he needs to be Littlefinger or Varys the Spider, but he's just not there, right? So think of fictional examples and real-world examples of this line that Nietzsche said, whoever is unable to lie does not know what truth is. Think of the Maester at the wall at Castle Black, Aemon Targaryen, when Jon Snow was on trial for being with the wildlings. The so what is his name? The commander who hated Jon. I forget. Not Craster, whatever. But he asked the commander, who's temporarily in charge, asks, how did you come to know, who's lying or whatever. And Aemon Targaryen says, I grew up in King's Landing. And what is he suggesting? In King's Landing, as Peter Baelish, aka Littlefinger, said, we're all liars here, and all of us are better liars than you. Because Sansa was not much of a liar, right? And then she learns she's around some of the best liars, okay? And she's not able to hide she's not able to hide her truths and say her lies in a convincing way that leads her to her survival, although she learns later, right? And so, think about Arya Stark, when she goes to the House of Black and White. The faceless men, what do? They lie about who they are when they wear other people's faces. So they've learned the art of lying. And remember when they hit her and they say, like, you're a liar, and they smack her. What's your name? Who are you? I'm no one. I'm no one. And they're not believing her because she's not saying her lies convincingly. They can see that they can see the truth, and there's so much psychological stuff in that series. What I'm trying to get at here is that Nietzsche is before that time, and yet he has some very potent examples for us that can really make you think and really get you thinking about life, about your purpose, and all that. Now, he also says here, whoever is unable... Oh, yeah. I do not believe chilled spirits. Remember he talked about how being a cold soul isn't bravery? Now he's saying chilled spirits. Okay? There's no fiery passion in a chilled spirit. Right? They've cut themselves off from that. Okay? Remember he said here on part 4, cold souls muse the blind, and the drunken I do not call brave. Brave is he who knows fear but conquers fear, who sees the abyss but with pride. And here he just said, freedom from fever is not yet knowledge. By any means, I do not believe chilled spirits. Whoever is unable to lie does not know what truth is. So all his points are connecting. Right? Renaissance they have eased into their authority and lie or no longer know they lie. Oh yeah, that was from the last one. He also says, they planned and Allah planned. Allah is the best of planners. Quran 354, the word in Arabic for plan also means scheming. It's good to have a capacity to scheme. Yeah, stratagem, right? Tactics, plots, all that. It's all related. They're synonyms that have a great connection and stuff. Okay, we'll pause here. We'll pick up on 10 next time. I'm gonna get dinner started. Okay? And prayer's coming up soon. So I gotta get some food in the oven. And then all that jazz. But we are doing great. I bet you 2 or 3 more videos and we'll have finished the book. Alright? Gentleman Q says saucy session as usual. Yes, subhanAllah. Nietzsche's saucy, man. So take care, everyone. My plan is after we finish this book, we probably, like I said, 2 or 3 more videos. We'll bust it out, be done, and then we're gonna go through the fiqh book, concise precision of fiqh, and then focus a lot on Khalid bin Walid and that book. And then the plan is also to finish the Tafsir Volume 1, almost done with it, and the biography of Uthman ibn Affan. Right? Thanks to everyone for showing up. I appreciate all of you. I know there's a lot of competition out there for knowledge and entertainment, and I appreciate you all being here, and I'm glad the notification actually worked for you, because it doesn't really work most of the time. So take care, like, comment, subscribe, join the blog, do all that jazz. Until next time.